Good afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today on how to improve Tableau Dashboards with Dashboard Design Analytics. I'm Karen Rajat, Unalytics Marketing Director, and I have with me today Eric Tobias, who will be presenting. He is our Vice President of Analytics Services. Just before we get started, I want to tell you a bit about Unalytics and why we know so much about dashboards and analytics and how we're related to Tableau. So we've been a leading provider of analytics products and services since 2001. We actually spent our first few years in the web analytics space analyzing website traffic. This gave us the knowledge and the skill to develop dashboard design analytics to track user events in dashboards to help us understand how our dashboards are really being used. The dashboard analytics give us the insight we need to improve dashboards and provide a better user experience. Eric will tell you a lot more about this in just a few moments. So Unalytics has over 900 customers, and they cover pretty well every industry and functional area. We've been a Tableau certified partner for over 5 years, so we're not only a reseller, but we have also completed over 150 Tableau engagements. Our services include Tableau training, dashboard creation, as well as data warehouse and ETL services. Here is a sampling of just some of the clients that we've worked with over the last 12 months. Now, just before I hand things over to Eric, I want to let you know that there will be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar. You can type your questions into the control panel, which you'll find at the top right of your screen. And one final thing, today's webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website. So now I'll pass you over to Eric, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Karen mentioned, I'm Eric Tobias. I'm the VP of Analytics Services, and I will be going over what we call DDA, or Dashboard Design Analytics. Just to give you an idea of what it does, DDA captures and records any sort of interactions with a Tableau dashboard. So for example, if you have a dashboard and you have it on your intranet, you can capture things like which filters do they use, how often do they use them, what values do they pick, what views have they looked at, if there was a map, for example, which states do they click on, if they set parameter values, what values did they pick. So all of those, we would consider those interactions. All of that information in DDA is collected and then forwarded off to your Google Analytics account. And then the reporting is done from a Tableau workbook. So the Tableau workbook connects up to your Google Analytics account, pulls all the data down, and makes it available to you. Just to give you an idea of how this differs from what Tableau Server already provides. So DDA is not Tableau Server, doesn't run on Tableau Server. It runs separately from Tableau Server. So for example, what Tableau Server currently provides is it can tell you which users have looked at visuals, how long did it take to render the visual, which workbook was loaded, how frequently was the workbook loaded up, etc. So we call that above the view. That's what Tableau Server currently provides. But then there's also below the view. So that's all of the individual controls that are on your visuals themselves. So these would be the things that your content creators built into the dashboards. So that could be filters and which values they picked, parameters and the values they picked. It could be marks that they've selected in the scatter plot, for example, what buttons they clicked as far as undo, reset, etc. It also records it all as what's called clickstream data. Clickstream data means that that information is captured in real time, forwarded off to the Google Analytics account, so you can actually see the sequence that the dashboard users followed. So for example, if a dashboard user gets lost or runs into a problem, you'd actually be able to track the exact sequence of clicks that they went through in order to get there. So that is what clickstream data is, and that is what DDA collects. So how it actually works is there's a collector script that ends up getting installed along with the Tableau dashboard or dashboard. You can track multiple ones, not just, you can do more than just one. The collector intercepts all of those interactions. It then packages them all up and logs them to a Google Analytics account, which would be your Google Analytics account, as opposed to, for example, our Google Analytics account. It will not be logged to our account, only to your account, never to any third-party accounts at all. Then a Tableau workbook, which we would provide, is opened up. You put in your credentials for your GA account, and then it will pull the data in and now make it available to everybody to use. So to give you an idea of roughly how this all works together, this does work with any of the Tableau Server products. So this could be Tableau Server, Tableau Online, or Tableau Public, which are obviously server software provided by Tableau. The visual has to be loaded inside a web page. So for example, we don't capture activity on a Tableau desktop sitting on your workstation. We would only capture activity for a Tableau visual that is being loaded up inside a web browser. So it has to be on a web page. It can't even be directly from Tableau Server itself. It actually does need to be, for example, on an intranet, or if you have a public website and you are embedding Tableau Public visuals, you can track that. But as long as the visual is being loaded up inside a web page, as part of a web page, then you can track that activity. And the way that works is there is a DDA script which we provide you, and it essentially makes use of the GA script and the Tableau API script. So Tableau provides what they call their SDK, which is essentially a variety of libraries that allow you to dynamically interact with Tableau infrastructure. In this particular case, what that means is we have a JavaScript library from Tableau that is loaded up that detects all of these interactions. So point being, this is not, our code does not hack Tableau at all. These are fully 100% supported Tableau APIs that we are making use of. So our DDA collector loads both of those up, and then it essentially interacts between the two to pull data from one and log it to another location. So that's what DDA does. The web page loads up the DDA script, which then forwards that data off to, again, your Google Analytics account, which is obviously provided by Google. And then when you want to look at your overall numbers on how your dashboards have been used, you open up the Tableau workbook, and that Tableau workbook is one that we provide to you as part of the DDA service when you buy that. So the things that we actually deliver to you, so this comes from Unalytics as opposed to, for example, coming from Tableau or from Google. In this particular case, we deliver the collector script to you. We also deliver a Tableau workbook that has a number of visuals already defined inside that, as well as instructions on how to implement that. That includes how to configure the GA tag, as it's called, so that's the JavaScript, instructions on how to properly set that up. We also provide 8 hours of assistance for you in getting started. So most organizations that we have worked with find that it's very easy to get that implemented, and setting up the DDA script and the Google Analytics is pretty self-explanatory. But if you do need assistance, that comes with the purchase of DDA, again, up to 8 hours. So some organizations will use that 8 hours for us to get a GA account for them, to set up the GA tracking for them, whereas others will actually have us build visuals for them that are customized specifically for their use. Doesn't matter how you want to use those 8 hours, it's totally up to you. So here's a screenshot of this. I'm actually going to, instead of showing you a static version of it, I'm going to flip over here to the dashboard design analytics. This is a functional version of what we're talking about. So inside this particular account, we have tracked activity to 6 different dashboards. You can see those listed under the dashboards monitored section. And what we're looking at here is we're looking at activity that was generated from the 8th of December 2017 through the 5th of February 2018. So all of the data that we're looking at will reflect that particular time period. So we can see, for example, one of them is, this is an IMDb dashboard. I can click on that. Actually, let me undo that. If I hover over that, you can actually see the amount of activity that's been going on, highs and lows. We show you there, for example, how many times it was actually viewed, which is the green bars, or the green lines. They show you, for example, that on the 15th of December, it wasn't looked at, but actually on the 15th it was looked at twice, whereas on the 25th of December, probably as we'd expect, the volume was very low on Christmas. The blue line shows you how many times it was interacted with. So even though some people did look at it over the holidays, the interactions really didn't kick off until middle of January, where you can see that somewhere around January 14th, there were 113 and 120 different interactions that people made with that particular dashboard. Similarly, other dashboards, we can hover over those, we can see what the relative activity volumes are. If you want details about any one of these, you can actually click on that. So for example, the Toronto Parking Infractions dashboard, I'm going to click on that. And what you'll see down here is you'll see that the types of activity have now been updated. So what this is now telling us is that for people that use the Toronto Parking Infractions dashboard, 76% of them were using it to interact with it by selecting marks. That could mean they, in case you have never heard of our Toronto Parking Tickets dashboard, it's a fairly popular one. It lists all of the streets in Toronto where parking tickets were issued, what the infraction was, what state or province the car was from, what the address was, what the amount of the ticket was, etc. So what this is telling us is that 76% of the time, or 3/4 of the time, when people interacted with the dashboard, they were clicking on marks. So that could be clicking on a street name, that could be clicking on one of the states in the map up on the top left, they could be clicking on a particular infraction code to see how many tickets were issued. So that's what select mark means. 8% of the time, for example, it was people loading up the view. So that is when they initially access the dashboard and they load that up, that counts as one interaction. So that's 8% of the time. There are parameters on that dashboard. So there's filters, parameters, all kinds of different elements that are on there. So 6% of the time they were applying parameter values. So obviously we might want to get a little bit more detail than that. So if I wanted to know, for example, what marks are people selecting? So let's say that you have a particularly complicated dashboard and you have a filter that takes a lot of time and effort to maintain because it comes from, let's say, a text file and it has a lot of really messy data in there. And so you have to use this filter. In order to use this filter, you have to do a whole bunch of cleanup. You spend hours every month trying to get that all cleaned up. So the question might be, are people using that? If you're putting in hours and hours every month just to get a filter to work and people aren't using it, maybe you can spend your resources elsewhere. So for example, we can come in here and we're now looking at the Toronto Parking Tickets dashboard. What types of marks were they selecting? So we can say, for example, I'd like to see what streets were they clicking on. So what that is there are bar charts, and the bar charts have the top 20 streets where parking infractions were incurred. So if I want to know what streets people clicked on, I can filter down here to only see what streets did people select, what marks did they select. So inside here we can see that the number 1 is Yonge Street. So people were choosing Yonge Street as the big street here in Toronto. So that means that people are actually clicking on Yonge Street's bar so that they can see what tickets were issued, how frequently they were issued, what hour of the day they were issued, etc. So that's what the relative bars are. So it tells us that people use the Yonge Street most often, followed by Danforth Avenue, Bayview Avenue, King Street. So you can actually see which of the bars they were clicking on inside that view. So again, if we were assuming that this particular filter was really difficult to maintain, and we find that people aren't using it very often, then we could actually conserve our resources and put them somewhere else. So that's one of the good purposes for using DDA, is to see are all features being used? If all features aren't being used, which ones are and which ones aren't? So this is the summary information. If we'd like more detail, we can even click on our detail link up here. where we can actually view more detailed information on individual dashboards. So if I click inside here, now you'll see again, here's the 6 dashboards that we're currently tracking. So if I wanted to see more detail on the parking infraction dashboard, I would click on that. And I get a little screenshot of it, which still has the relative activity showing up there. But then we see some ratios. And currently this is broken down into 2017 and 2018, December and January data. So what we get here is we are told that there were a total of 19 days where there was activity to this dashboard. Over those 19 days, there were 21 sessions. So that means that most of the days, the dashboard was used once. However, there were at least a couple of days when it was used multiple times by different people. This also tells us how long people are interacting with the dashboard. And this is done in seconds. So this means 292 seconds is the average length of time that people interact with this dashboard. So if we figure that out, that's about 5 minutes. So this is saying that the average user of the parking tickets dashboard is using it for about 5 minutes. That's also pretty helpful. If you have a dashboard that you spend lots and lots of time on, but you see that the average session length is 20 seconds, it probably means they're not really getting value out of what you created, and you may want to revisit that. Other information we get here, number of interactions. There are 276 different ways that people interacted with this dashboard for a total of 283 different events. With all of that information, then we start to get some ratios that tell us what our relative volume is, how much activity has been going to those particular dashboards. So we can see, for example, that on average, people interact with the dashboard 12 times with this particular dashboard. So when they log in, they open up the dashboard, they start clicking around. On average, they click around 12 times. And on average, that's about 14 times a day. So imagine if you have a high volume dashboard, you would be seeing much higher numbers than that. But that's essentially what we get in here. And then inside here, for example, we can see how the activity level has changed. Looks like our 2017 numbers were all higher than our 2018. So you can actually see that the activity volume has slowed down between the December-January months. Other information that we get inside here, we can break things down by day, by week. This only contains, about 3 months worth of data, so doing years or quarters wouldn't make a lot of sense. So we can break the data down by different time periods. Plus we can also get down into looking at individual intervals. So for example, what is the most frequent day of the week that the dashboard is used? So we break this down. We show that in this case, we're looking at views. So how often is this particular dashboard being loaded up? Looks like it's pretty consistent, except for Fridays. There are a far larger number of interactions occurring on Fridays, so this dashboard gets used a lot on Fridays. We can also look at it by the hour of the day. If I click on that, I can see that this has a very familiar curve to it if you've had to work with business data before, because it shows that we have a large number early in the business day, peters out around lunchtime, and then picks back up in the middle of the afternoon, and then trails off toward the evening time. So we can see in this case that a lot of times business days start around 9 a.m. In our particular case, our users are actually using this starting at 6 a.m. and our most frequently accessed hour of the day is actually at 7 a.m. So this dashboard is used very heavily at 7 a.m. Likewise, we can also look at the day of the month. So for example, some of our clients, they have an end of the month cycle where they're running lots of month-end reporting, and you would expect to see a big spike like this. So that you would expect to see each month, toward the end of the month, there'd be a big spike where your dashboard is used quite a lot. And this is across 3 different months. So this then is on the 26th day of the month, there were 40 different interactions that occurred across those 3 months. So that allows you to break down a bit into the different time periods so you can understand what the usage patterns are. And then finally, the other information that is provided is what we call our interaction sequencing. So this is what I mentioned before, clickstream data. So with clickstream data, you can actually see how people used the dashboards. So right now, we're looking at the Toronto parking infraction still. It's the same thing we were looking at before. And you can see that our very first usage occurred on the 8th of December 2017, lasted 289 seconds, and was interacted with only 4 times. So not a huge amount of interaction. So a small square means not many people are using it. A big square means a lot of people are using it. So we can see that we certainly had some big points on the 11th of December, on the 23rd of December, and then on the 8th and 11th of January. And if you actually want to know what the specific sequence was, that's what the view over here on the right is. So you can see in any given day that the first session started at 9:15 a.m. The next session was at 5:37 p.m. Followed by 2 days later on the 10th of December at 7:57 a.m. Another session started, etc. So you can actually see the sequence in which people access this particular dashboard. And then if you want even more detail, you can go down to the individual interactions. So if we, for example, wanted to look at one of our big days here, so the 23rd of December, somebody started a session at 8:27 a.m., did 24 different things. I can actually click on that, and I will see that they all occurred on the same day, which all makes sense. But then I can actually see what the interaction sequence was that they followed for all 24 of those. So the first thing they did is they opened up the view, which is mandatory for the first one. Then for some reason they clicked the undo button. 7 seconds later, they set the country to Canada. And they clicked on Alberta, so that's what set Canada. And then they selected the total fines and tickets issued at 326,250 with 6,393 tickets being issued. So what this is essentially showing us is the exact sequence that people went through when they were clicking with the view itself. So again, we can see, for example, the first thing they did is clicked on Alberta. The second thing they did is clicked on BC. We scroll down further. Did they click on anything else? Yep, looks like the next thing they did is they then clicked on Danforth Avenue. So you can actually see the individual interactions that people are following inside here. And again, that's for just that one session, so that one person logging in there. If we unselect that again, now we're looking at all of the sessions. So you can actually start to see sequentially across time, what were people clicking on in your views. And that's the whole point of the dashboard analytics. So with that, I'm going to come back over to our presentation. I actually just showed you all of this, so we don't need to go through that. So I'll very briefly give you an idea of how this is implemented. So the collector, that's the thing that we provide to you when you purchase the service. It's configured to work with your web-based dashboard and use your Google Analytics account to receive that activity data. The Google Analytics account needs to be configured. Many of our clients do that themselves, but if you do need assistance, obviously you do have the 8 hours that you can use. The Google Analytics account has to be configured to listen for DDA. Not to mention, you also have to create a login that the Tableau workbook can use to retrieve your data for you. Once that's set up, the next step, you have to configure the Tableau workbook by editing the data source and entering the credentials of the Google Analytics account that you set up. So that's usually a 15 or 20 second exercise. So the things that you'll need in order to do all of that, it does need to be a web-based dashboard. Again, keep in mind, this is not tracking activity from your desktop. So you can't, for example, use this for people downloading workbooks onto their workstation. This is only web-based dashboards. You do have to have a Google Analytics account. You do need to set up an account and a profile for DDA. You do need our collector script. You will need Tableau Desktop in order to create the dashboards and to look at the resulting views from DDA. You will have to have credentials that are authorized to pull the DDA data out so that it can be viewed inside Tableau. And a few things to be aware of in terms of limitations. I mentioned this before, but I want to mention it yet again. DDA does not capture activity directly from a workbook on somebody's workstation. So if you have somebody working on their desktop and they're running Tableau Desktop Professional and they're interacting with the SQL Server, DDA cannot capture any of that information. It's only once the workbook has been completed, published to Tableau Server, any of the Tableau Server flavors, Server, Online, or Public, and then that Tableau dashboard is viewed inside a web browser. That's when DDA can capture that activity. DDA only works with Google Analytics at the moment. It does not work with things like Adobe, WebTrends, Piwik, etc. Some pricing, it's broken out into two different types of pricing. There's small and medium business pricing. Those would be organizations that have less than 100 interactors on your Tableau server. The price for that is $29.95 per year. It is subscription pricing. If you are a larger enterprise where you have more than 100 interactors, then the price is $59.95. And that does include that 8 hours that I mentioned before for getting things set up. And again, that can be used to implement the JavaScripts themselves. That could also be used to create additional visuals that you want, or to show you how to interpret the results, etc. Whatever you want to do with those 8 hours. So that's it in terms of the workbook itself. That's also it in terms of the presentation.